That's me. No, Joseph, Mark, really happy to be here. Bit of background on me. Almost hitting 17 years of being in this space makes me feel very, very old, but a hell of a time, right? Doing what we've been doing for such a long time. Spent actually just hit 10 years as a SVP of research at Ardent Partners. We are an analyst, research, and advisory firm based just outside of Boston. Really, my entire analyst career has really been focused on workforce management, talent acquisition, and particularly over the past decade, the future of work as well. And so I do call myself a future of work evangelist, right? I mean, I'm very, very passionate about the ways that companies are optimizing the ways they get work done, whether it's through advanced talent acquisition, or remote work, or improving DE&I, or digital transformation, whatever the hot button topics are under the future of work movement. They are passions of mine. And I'm also managing director of, I keep calling it brand new, but it's been around for 2 years, the Future of Work Exchange. You can visit at futureofworkexchange.com. It really is the daily destination for all of your future of work news, research, analysis, and insights. And again, Mark and Joseph, really thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
Joseph's on mute.
So Joseph, you're on mute.
Please go. Yeah, please go ahead, Mark. I don't know what's happening with me in Zoom today, but you take it away, please.
Yeah, no worries. So from an introduction perspective, my name is Mark Brodsky. I head up sales for Glider, but for both the US and EMEA. My pedigree is really, I spent a significant amount of time at a leading VMS provider, running sales in the East. And then prior to that, had a software career at Oracle, but entered into, much like most people in our organization, the staffing contingent labor world via a staffing provider. So, it was a good fit for me coming from staffing with some software, moving into, at the time, it was emerging technology within VMS. And now I've been at Glider, heading up sales for the last 2.5 years. So excited to be here.
I was about to talk when I was on mute.
It's not Joseph, stay with Zoom.
It is not. I mute myself in case the dogs or the cats in the background, right. A lot of sound effects. So I wanted to spare everyone the background noise. But thank you both for sharing your backgrounds. Why don't we start with you, Chris? Give us a quick overview of what is a skills-based organization? What are some data points that our audience should know about it?
Yeah, so you may have heard this phrase before, right? I mean, it's become part of the future of work lexicon. I mean, even in HR tech and workforce tech, even talking about the extended workforce as well, we've been hearing about this phrase skills-based organization for quite some time. And literally what it is just being more candidate-centric, right? Placing skills at the center of your hiring strategies, and really, I guess, when you look at things like project and initiative alignment, it's less about the job and the roles and more about the skills that you have, right? And from my perspective, at least, and I'm sure Mark and Joseph would share these sentiments, right? It allows you as an organization to really future-proof your workforce, allows you to be better prepared and be less reactive and more proactive in how you attack new challenges in the organization, right? I mean, think about where we are today, right? I was just on a webinar a few weeks ago, and I popped up this slide and called it the state of talent and work today, right? I mean, we're dealing with still a volatile labor market. You want to call it a soft or a light recession, whatever the hell it is, we're still in it right now. These are seriously, these are tougher economic times than we're used to. You've got disruption all over the place. We have a war raging across the other side of the world that has a ripple effect over here. Companies are still struggling with becoming digital and becoming more digitized in the way that they operate. And then on top of all of that, you still have the fallout from not just the pandemic, but you have a fallout from a fallout piece of the pandemic, the Great Resignation, right? I call it the Great Resettling, because now we're starting to see all of those millions and millions, tens of millions of workers starting to resettle and trying to figure out what they're going to do at the next phase of their careers and their lives. And so all of this means is that, as a skills-based organization, you are becoming more skills oriented and more deliberate about the skills that you have within your organization today, within your talent network and talent community. And so, I think that's my rambling definition. Mark, you probably have some stuff to add there.
Well, look, I as a sales guy, right, I take more of that kind of value prop. What do organizations that are taking a skills-based hiring approach really gain? And why is that initiative important for them to transition from, more of like an educational pedigree, background, experience type of vetting to, do you have the skills we need for this job, right? So the first thing is, organizations that are embracing and adopting a skills-based hiring initiative, they widen the talent pool. I mean, just the very first thing that happens is the talent pool is widened. Only 62% of Americans over 25 have a college education, a 4-year degree. So that in and of itself, expands that talent pool. It accelerates, like our analytics are showing, it accelerates the time to hire. So obviously time to submit, and I try to be more, widespread in my view. I come from the contingent labor world, and sometimes I omit talking about full-time hiring because my focus has always just been so contingent focused. But regardless, it accelerates the time to hire. It reduces that cost, which the time to hire and the cost reduction are really kind of go hand in hand, right? In our industry, we use the phrase hiring manager. It's such a bad term to use. We all use it, right? Right now, I'm looking for a new sales rep. So in essence, I'm a hiring manager, but that is literally at 1% of my job. Just like hiring managers within the organizations we service, the organizations we're talking about, they're not hiring managers. They have hard and fast deliverables, responsibilities to their organization. I bet you if you asked them, one of the worst parts about their job is hiring. I mean, augmenting their team. So that reduction of cost, when we looking more at skills as opposed to vetting this storied background of your candidate, is much more deliberate, right? And then obviously, like for organizations that are focused on skills-based hiring, retention, the analytics are showing retention goes through the roof because you're aligning someone with a specific set of skills to a job that is very kind of focused on the skills that they have that they're delivering day to day. So, again, I know I look at more of the value prop, and Chris looks at more holistically, what does it mean to the, to the industry from an organizational perspective. But that's kind of my take on where the skills-based hiring initiative is kind of going.
Yeah, really interesting. Obviously there's a lot of great data points, as you mentioned, Mark. Retention, diversity, it improves the diversity pool. Chris, do you have any other data points that you've seen in the market around, specific to skills-based hiring, like how it has improved company metrics? Just curious there.
Yeah, you know what? Actually, I may do you one better, Joseph, right? And I'm going to talk about why the skills-based organization is needed today. So brand new Future of Work Exchange and Ardent Research finds that 80%, actually over 80%, it's 81% of businesses state that they lack candidates with the required skill sets, right? And so that's huge, right? We're not talking about half of organizations. We're not talking about a third. We're talking about the vast majority of organizations looking at their open requisitions. They're looking at their jobs. They're looking at their roles. They're looking at different functions across their enterprise. And they could literally say to themselves, we don't have the right people here, right? And so I think it's more of a question of why should businesses be more skills-based and more deliberate around skills? We don't have the candidates. We don't have the right people in our organization. We don't have the right people in our talent pipelines to get the work done that we need to get done. And then a follow-up finding to that, and this is amazing too. These are things that are blowing me away, and it takes a lot to really shock me after being being in this industry for such a long time. 74% of businesses state that in 2023, they need to build deeper talent pipelines, right? Doesn't need to expand their talent pipeline, just need to build deeper talent pipelines. It doesn't mean more people, it's the quality of those people, the quality of those candidates. And that is huge, right? There's, I mean, again, and I hate the phrase, and Mark, I'm sure you'll agree with me. I hate the phrase war for talent, right? I mean, we've been talking about that for, what, a decade, 12 years. I mean, I remember even before I joined Ardent and all of that, that was a phrase. There's always going to be a war for talent. Every business's top competitive differentiator is their talent, right? So we need to find the best talent possible. But I think where we are today, it's a little bit different, right? We're not in a business world where we can afford really to be very reactive to things. We can't afford to be a little bit slower and less deliberate in how we hire and how we strategize around hiring, right? If we don't find the right candidates and we don't approach those candidates the right way, Mark brings up the idea of the hiring manager, right? One thing that I like to talk about a lot is, we talk about candidate experience a lot. Sometimes we forget about the hiring manager experience. Are we giving the hiring managers the right tools to do their job effectively? And this is why I'm so bullish on a concept I call omni-channel talent acquisition, right? Omni-channel is a phrase I borrowed from commerce, right? If I need to buy a new water bottle, right? I can go to Target, I can go to Walmart, I can use Amazon, I can use a specific website for, insulated water bottles. The omni-channel experience is great for me as a consumer. What if we could give that experience and translate that experience to the hiring manager, right? And so we're living in this world, right, where there's so much more emphasis on being very proactive and giving our hiring managers and our talent acquisition execs the right tools to succeed. And so, again, over 80% of businesses don't have the right candidates with the right skills. 74% plan on, right? This isn't just, hey, we want to do this. They plan on building deeper talent pipelines. And I think those stats really speak for themselves.
Yeah, and excuse me, a reminder for everyone here on today's webinar, we'll be sharing some of the data points that Chris is talking about today. So don't worry about trying to write those down. And also, if you do have any questions that you want to ask live, please just message me directly and I can unmute you if you like, and you can ask them directly of Mark and Chris. But super interesting points, Chris. One of the things that we were talking about prior to today's call was that we're no longer in the advent of AI, right? I think I saw this morning that ChatGPT, there's like another release that's even smarter. And there are these new skills that organizations are struggling to find. And there's like this repository of talent that might have skills that this company is unaware of because of the traditional hiring process, right? They've conformed themselves to this job description where it's like, hey, I've got a much broader skill set that I can actually add a lot more value to the organization. So really, skills-based hiring is more than just a talent acquisition strategy. It is also a long-term talent retention strategy. How do you engage my employees and whatnot? I guess, long story short, how do you leverage, skills-based hiring for the long term? Like, how do you actually tactically implement it, right? Like, do you do away with the job descriptions or do you keep job descriptions? How do you find people with the right skill in your organization? What is the process there, Chris or Mark? Please go ahead.
Mark, you want to hit this one and then I'll chime in?
Yeah. So I'll start with, looking at it, we've been talking about kind of the both sides of the coin, right? The organization, the hiring manager experience, as well as the candidate experience. The most fascinating thing is when you talk about employing a skills-based hiring initiative within an organization, the first thing is within that organization, and I'm trying to flex and not look at just contingent labor, but if you think about the contingent labor process, and I'm sure the same is true for the full-time process, but the change management within an organization is it's so small. So if you think about a traditional workflow where a hiring manager creates a rec, the rec goes through the program office, whether it's internal, whether it's an external MSP, it goes out to the staffing suppliers, and then candidates come back in through the VMS. A skills-based hiring initiative does not augment or change that process at all, except for those suppliers are asking candidates to validate their skills, typically via an assessment, right? A skills assessment. And then that assessment is being used for two purposes. One, identifying whether that supplier should even submit that candidate. Most of technical suppliers, technical recruiters, they're not technical themselves, but they understand how to vet the technical nature and proficiency of a candidate, but they can only do it to a certain degree, right? They're looking at historical work experience, maybe asking a couple of questions. But when you start looking at infusing, truly testing skill proficiency against the job, now that supplier has very good line of sight to say, yes, although your resume looks like you're a great fit, your assessment, your demonstration of your skill proficiency is not a good fit, or it is a good fit. So now, if you think about it on the enterprise side, those individuals that are reviewing this candidate that are fit, that candidate's fit for purpose, they're just doing exactly what they did before skills-based hiring initiative, but with better data, right? So now they're able to say, hey, I've got these 19 candidates or these 10 candidates coming in from my staffing suppliers, and I'm able to stack rank them. And I'm able to see, a fit and alignment to, Mr. and Mrs. hiring manager's role. And I'm going to take these 3 candidates and pass them along because they're the best fit for the position. Now, from a hiring manager perspective, look, we have customers, that are utilizing Glider as their technical interview, right? So now they're doing a soft skills interview to say, hey, I want to talk to candidate, Sally Smith first, and then Bob Jones second. And what our analytics are showing is, when my team provided me analytics around the submission to interview ratio, it actually showed that was down. And I said, guys, what's going on here? That's not the analytic I thought I was going to get from you. And they were like, no, you're not interpreting that right. What's happening is the manager's getting 3 candidates shortlisted to them. Based on those 3 shortlists, when they have this skill-based alignment and data, they're able to say, I want to interview Sally Smith first. And when Sally Smith goes through a soft skills interview and a validation, the manager's saying, let's move forward with Sally Smith. I don't even need to interview the other 2 candidates. So when we talk about candidate pipeline, silver medalists, now you're talking about 2 candidates that may have been a good fit, but didn't get the job, but are great folks to sit in a talent network when a reoccurring requisition comes up for the same skill set. They've already been vetted through the process. And so for me, it's always been one of these things where the change management is just really, really low. However, adoption to change management within our industry has always been very challenging. So Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. It's just my perspective on kind of the initial step organizations can take.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, there's a reason you've been in the space longer than I have, right? I mean, that answer right there proves it. No, I mean, not much to add. I mean, Mark, you made a comment earlier that I tend to look at things, maybe broader, maybe holistically, just because of my relationship with HR, TA, procurement, and all of that. But I mean, I think you pretty much nailed it, right? I mean, I think one of the biggest things, and you mentioned change management, is you have to sort of transform a way of thinking that's been the norm for such a long time, right? And I'm not going to say start with baby steps, but we're so beholden to the job description, right? And I forget who told me this, and I can't take credit for it, right? I'd love to, but it takes someone writing a job description 20 times writing that job description before they actually nail it, before it's actually a perfect job description. And to me, if you're doing that across hundreds of different roles, you're not going to find the right candidates, right? And so if you're hiring more for skill, which, and I think you even go a little bit deeper, you're hiring for purpose, right? And you're hiring for people who are very, very passionate about coding, about graphic design, about Java development, whatever it is that we are assessing for, and whatever specific skills we're looking for. I think at the end of the day, we're being much more deliberate in how we hire. And 2, right? I mean, one of the stats that I was looking at a little bit earlier was how are businesses recession-proofing their workforce? And I haven't unveiled any of this publicly yet, but I think something between 70 and 75% of businesses are sort of reevaluating their current skills, right? Internally and externally. Who's in my talent community? Who are my FTEs, to figure out where are the biggest skills gaps, right? I think that one thing that caught a lot of businesses off guard a few years ago. I mean, I think just think about 3 years ago right now. Tons of uncertainty, kids being pulled out of school. I mean, I think the thing that really hit home for me, and this is, I've never seen a sports season get suspended like the NBA did. Literally, what, 12 hours after they announced that, you know, there's a global, the WHO announced that there's a global pandemic. So think about like just how scary that period of time was. We had to scale down our workforce very, very quickly, right? And then within 3 or 4 months, summer months came, we had to scale up very, very quickly. I think that that's a very hard lesson that businesses learned, that if we don't have the right skill sets within our organization, when there's more demand for our products and services, we may not have the right people, and we need the right tools to set ourselves up for success when we actually have to go out and find those skill sets. And so I think moving from more traditional job-based hiring to skills-based hiring isn't a here and now thing. It's not, hey, 2023 light recession, soft recession, again, whatever we want to call it. It's not a product of just living in this sort of globalized, hyper competitive environment. I think at the end of the day, it's really future proofing, right? Like I said, in between 70 and 75% of businesses today are reevaluating, reanalyzing their internal skill sets. And that just proves to me, and just proves to everyone on the line today, that, you know, we need to shift the way we hire.
Yeah, and the last thing I
sorry.
want to do is get onto my soapbox, but you know, I am super passionate about this. I mean, look, I left a great organization, a great job to come to Glider because I felt so passionate that there was going to be a shift, and I still do, right? But when people ask me, so how do organizations go about this? The first is, I think contingent labor, and again, going back to contingent labor, but I think contingent labor is a great place to start, especially today. When we all started in the contingent labor, the staffing industry, even before VMS was around, contingent labor was a way to get a permanent job, right? Temp to perm, try before you buy. Now contingent labor is individuals that want to increase their skill set and then move on to another job, another organization, another project where they can harness that skill set and then get more skills, right? And begin to build their repertoire of skills. And so contingent labor is an awesome place for that to start. And so when you don't need to boil the ocean either, right? You don't need to go live across all of IT. I mean, obviously, as a sales guy, I would love it to be all across all of IT, but where we've seen our most successful customers is where we've worked with an individual group within an IT organization. And that group has begun to evangelize the use of, you know, highly proctored technical assessments to vet skills, to say to other managers, well, if you're not doing this, you're missing the boat, right? I mean, this has had a profound impact on our hiring, our retention. And Joseph, you mentioned something about like job descriptions and job titles, job descriptions. Here's the other thing that we're finding, and our head of operations, Ben Walker, will validate this 100 times over. But you have a position coming out of an organization like a full stack developer. Well, guess what? For different hiring managers, for different BUs, for different geos, that full stack developer is not a full stack developer. There are nuances, permutations to what those hiring managers are looking for. And so, the other thing that a skills-based hiring initiative does is it kind of goes to the individual hiring manager and says, what do you specifically need? Like, you help us define what is a full stack developer, not industry-wide, but for you, for what you're trying to deliver to your customer, to your organization, and let us marry that up with the type of individuals you're looking for. And so we find that when we implement, a lot of times, we have like full stack developers that have nuances to the job title, right? Full stack developer for this part of the business, full stack developer for this hiring manager. And so that alignment is making people scratch their heads and say, this is why one of two things are happening. Either we have 290 JDs sitting in our VMS and it's a mess, or the MSP or the internal program office is tasked with, I don't want to say bastardizing, but augmenting every single rec that comes through based on their tribal knowledge that this rec is for Chris Dreyer. And I know Chris always is looking for high skill Node.js and this, even though the rec doesn't really state that, we've gone down this path with Chris before. And so now that's a nuanced rec that's very different than, you know, Mary's rec coming out of another group. And so we're seeing that this is kind of exposing the fact that a single job rec for, you know, these full stack developers, front end developers, back end developers, it's such a marriage of IT skills that are nuanced across an organization, and it's really exposing, you know, some of the cracks in traditional JDs.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Mark. So I've got a few audience questions. I love what you were, you know, kind of alluding to there, Mark. It does create accountability. You know, the skills-based hiring creates accountability for, the lack of a better word, the hiring manager, but also, you know, the candidate knows specifically, hey, I'm accountable to these skills or these goals, and I actually feel comfortable in achieving, you know, the skills that are in this, you know, this job. Chris, and the other thing that you said that was really cool is the job is really about purpose, right? You know, skills-based hiring is about skills purpose or job hiring purpose. But this question comes from Jody. I think you both answered this about pushback from HR and TA, and how do you encourage them to adopt this new process? Any ideas or examples that you could share?
I could take this, and I think, you know, Mark and I can probably tag team this together. And Jody, one of my favorite people on the planet, thank you for being here today, Jody. So Jody asked, you know, what feedback or pushback from HR and talent acquisition to adopt skills-based hiring. I think from my conversations with those in HR and TA that have done it successfully, they've said it's, you know, sometimes it could be a long haul. It takes time. Sometimes hiring for organizations isn't, believe it or not, it's not a strategic imperative, right? If something's not broken, we don't fix it, right? We get a steady stream of candidates in. Our time to fill rates, whether it's contingent or full time, aren't that long. You know, we're not really having problems finding people, but I think one of the eye-opening things for me was speaking with an SVP of TA at a pharma company, I think maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and this is where the idea of the skills-based organization, like, to me, really rang true. And she basically said that once we started to do a deeper skills evaluation, we realized that, you know, the quality of the candidates coming into our funnel, into our pipelines, really didn't stack up with what we needed when we did that evaluation. And so I think for pushback feedback from TA, you know, how can you get them over the hump? I think we have to drive and hammer home the idea of talent quality, and deepening. Not, again, there's a difference between expanding the talent pool and deepening the talent pool. To me, expanding it is just quantity, deepening it is a quality thing. And so if we could convince TA that we have the ability now to pump higher quality, better fit, better aligned candidates into our network and into our organizations, it's going to make sense, right? And again, there's not advertisement for Glider at all, but I mean, Mark, I mean, with the tech, I mean, you can literally prove to anyone in any function within the average enterprise, hey, this is how you actually assess for skills, and this is how powerful AI and technology can be when basically proving my point there, right? The fact that we can prove just how deep a candidate's skill sets are beyond the resume, beyond the interviewing, right? I think that if we can sort of speak TA and HR's language and say, we are going to improve the hiring process, we are going to improve the interviewing process, and we are going to not just improve, but we're going to transform the assessment experience as well. I think that helps them sort of rethink, hey, this may be something for us to really keep in mind for the future.
Yeah, no, I would fully agree with that. I think the thing that we stress, because, and by the way, Jody's one of my favorite people too, so we'll thumb wrestle over Chris. But so you know, for me, it's you know, folks in TA, folks in the program offices we deal with, right? They're serving their organization, and we all hear, like, what's an organization's biggest differentiator? It's people. And when you start asking to tinker with how do you engage the people? How do you service your internal customers, your hiring managers? It becomes really scary, right? I mean, from a talent acquisition, from a program office delivery, it becomes scary because now you're talking about impacting someone's success at delivering a project. And so that's why we always say you don't need to start, systemically and do every single rec or every single job coming out of your organization. Like take a department that has high volume usage for certain positions, typically technical positions, and start there and use that as a proving ground, and then take those results and begin to evangelize those across the organization. And a lot of times what we find kind of crossing that chasm and getting into the FTE side of the house is we have hiring managers that go, why do I get to look at a skills-based kind of report on a candidate on the contingent side, and I don't have that same luxury on the full-time side? And so we see expansion happening from contingent programs in through TA and HR into the full-time side, because these same managers are hiring both contingent workers and full-time workers, and they feel very handicapped once they're exposed to the data around a candidate's alignment to their role. And they feel confused, like, why can't we do this on the full-time side? And so we typically say, let this grow organically, right? We don't need to come in, like in the world of VMS and MSP, typically that's, yes, everybody needs to kind of follow a single process. Let us show results, let us show that a skills-based hiring initiative can have impact in a single part of your organization. And let that be the proving ground to kind of expand throughout the organization and show broader value.
Yeah, and there's more from Jody, which is always great. Jody, you asked the best questions, and I apologize if I butcher this, so I can unmute you. Just let me know. This goes back to the accountability, Mark, around skills-based hiring. I think is there a better, better data? Like, is there a step in the process to assess a current FTE doing this role? And is that, and that is baseline for other candidates to be considered? Does that make sense? And Jody, if I'm not asking correctly, please let us know.
It does. And Jody, you can kind of let us know if I'm missing on this, but I was actually going to bring up, if you're teeing up what I think you're teeing up, I think the other thing that taking a skills-based hiring approach with this level of data provides is future recs. You now have a technical DNA mapping of a candidate that's gotten a job and performed really well within that job. So now, as you talk to, whether it's your internal recruiters on the FTE side or your staffing suppliers on the contingent side, you can basically say, I need another Joseph Cole. Here is their skills mapping against this job. Here's how they did with each of those kind of bespoke skills. Yes, look at the JD, that's fine. But this is the type of candidate that's been very successful in our digital information group, in our finance and analytics group, whatever it is. But this is now the map to go better recruit. And look, staffing partners are key stakeholders in supporting Glider. And I talk to them all the time, and they validate that, yes, having like a footprint to kind of go, this is what the ideal candidate looks like for this position, for this hiring manager. Having that data is something we've never in our industry had before, right? I mean, before I took this job, I reached out to all of my colleagues, my peers, my friends in the industry and said, how are you judging job performance? And it's like, well, if they early term and within the VMS, the assignment ends early and it's indicated because it's performance-based, we know it was a quality issue. It's like, wasn't that a little too late to identify a quality issue? And now you have to backfill. And so no one had a really good metric of saying, this is how we identify talent. This is how we quantify it. And now with a lot of these new assessment, myself included, my peers, my competitors, the data is there to make better decisions about quality of candidate, quality of skill proficiency before engaging them and kind of dipping your toe in the water with the candidate. Proactively, you can map to a person to say, we need another one of these. And by the way, suppliers, here's the way they scored on the assessment. So now you understand within these bespoke skills what we're going to be looking for because they've proven to be successful in this role.
Thank you. Now, speaking of you mentioned some of the metrics and talent quality, Chris and or Mark, what are some of the metrics that TA, HR, recruiters should be looking at to measure the success of a skills-based hiring program?
This is a good question. So when you're talking about skills and you're talking about work, candidates. To me, it all revolves around the quality at the end of the day of the impact, right? And so measuring productivity is nebulous, right? I mean, Joseph, I rank you on a scale of 1 to 10 of productivity. I'm going to say 10 all day, right? That's really, really nebulous, and that's not really going to be helpful. At Ardent and the Future Work Exchange, we've been using a metric for a number of years where we ask organizations, what percentage, and again, just focusing on contingent extended here, what percentage of your contingent or extended workforce has completed or exceeded predefined communicated goals and objectives, right? That's one way, right? So if I could say, all right, they were brought in to integrate this technology, right? My IT team, they were in to reconfigure our data security system. Did they do that? Did they exceed it? Wonderful. They get a check next to their name. That, I think, is 4 or 5 years ago. I think when we introduced it, that worked wonderfully. Today, I talk a little bit more about retention and re-engagement. So what percentage of your contingent workforce or extended workforce would you re-engage for a future project? And I think that is the biggest marker of quality from a post-engagement, post-project point of view, right? So if I hire Mark to come in and completely redesign my website and he does a fantastic job, and then 6 months down the line, we need more web development work, I'm willing to re-engage him. To me, he's done the job that he's done the job that we needed him to do, right? I think for HR and TA, it can be a little bit more difficult because things like time to fill and some of the more contingent oriented metrics, they're not really using. And so it can be a lot harder. I mean, back to even what Jody was asking, how do you get HR and TA on the same page, or how do you get them to reimagine or rethink job-based to skills-based hiring? That can be a little bit more difficult. I mean, again, I think it really boils down to the impact that workers are making and that new candidates are making. Really tough to measure. Mark, I'm not sure if you have any other ideas here.
No, I mean, I think you're right? Like it is a sticky wicket as far as validating, this. And so, the other thing that I think is useful is, looking at someone that's brought into an organization and looking at an L&D track for that individual to say, hey, we have future opportunities that you may not be ready for. Why don't we give you an assessment? Today, you're doing job A. We think you're really smart. We'd love you to be qualified to do job B. If you take this assessment, now you're able to see where your gaps are, and we can put together an L&D track for you. So Chris, going back to your point about the depth of candidates, it's like farm from your own land. If you have individuals that you've identified that are really smart and putting them on an L&D track, to me, if I'm in talent acquisition, if I'm in HR, it's like, that's a great sales pitch to say, let's utilize the talent we have within the organization, to make them optimal for higher degree jobs, like more advanced, higher skilled jobs, going through an L&D track. But you're right, it is a little bit challenging on the front end because these folks don't have line of sight into the business, right? They're not operators typically.
Yeah.
So Mark, as a follow-up to that, who are the stakeholders, from your experience when you're, working with hundreds of different customers and prospects, and how do you get buy-in from them?
Yeah, well, I think you need to look at the organization first, right? The first thing is, if the organization is using an MSP, the first thing you have to do is make sure you're aligned with the MSP. The MSP has tactical and strategic responsibility to that organization. If you try to bring in some initiative around the MSP that's going to impact their ability to deliver on what they've promised that organization, it's a fail from the start. So I think, like the first thing I did when I came to Glider was try to align myself with the industry leading MSPs to make sure they understood the value prop, right? They have the ear of the customer, make sure they, I wanted them to shoot holes in it and say, why wouldn't this work for some of your customers, so that we can go back and reevaluate that. So I think, first of all, if the organization is using an MSP, alignment with that MSP is critical, right? That's table stakes. I also think it's more of a bottom up if you're truly trying to sell the value into HR, procurement, TA, is having hiring managers say, I've gotten burned, I've had high turnover, I have high time to fill. Why can't we kind of look at a platform that will help me identify a candidate's skill proficiency that I need prior to engaging that worker and dealing with them if they don't have the skill that I have?
Mhm.
You know, like I said, HR, TA, procurement, they have internal customers. I mean, quite honestly, right? The hiring managers, the operators, the line of business, that's their internal customer. You obviously can take a top-down approach. I have found that a top-down approach typically doesn't work as a bottom-up approach. So yes, if you can get in at the C level and have somebody at the top say, we're doing this and pushing it down, it's a little force-fed as opposed to kind of a value proposition coming up from the actual consumer. In my eyes, that's the best way, right? Your consumers are really your MSP partners and your hiring managers. If those two are aligned and they're screaming, you know, up through TA, up through IT and procurement that they need additional data, that also kind of takes the burden of bringing in a solution and a skills-based hiring initiative off of TA. What I found is really smart people within organizations sometimes fear, right? Heavy is the head that wears the crown. If they are driving an initiative that fails, they're left out to dry. So if you can get a bottom-up initiative where, if per se, knock on wood, the initiative doesn't take, at least the organization knows they were reacting to their customers and not trying to, you know, solve the organization's problems with some outlandish solution. So that's been my take so far for my 2.5 years at Glider.
Chris, anything to add on that?
I mean, I think Mark nailed it, right? I mean, I think the next thing that I really wanted to talk about here, and maybe this is just bleeding into our next question, but just the utilization of tech here, because I think looking what we get 10 or so minutes left. I've got some great stats to talk about that I'm eager to share.
Yeah, please.
Cool. So, you know, I think we're talking so much about, you know, bringing in more advanced tech to help with skills-based hiring, right? And really achieving the goal of becoming a skills-based organization. And so, and this is, and again, I know sometimes I'm just a product, and I'm sure Mark thinks this way too. You spend so much time in the contingent workforce world, your brain sort of gets very, very used to that and talking about that. But I asked a question in our latest research study, what are the biggest shifts you see in your contingent workforce program over the next 12 to 18 months, right? And again, we launched this back in December, so it's very fresh in people's minds. And we saw that 82% of businesses plan to use more AI in how they manage their contingent labor and how they manage to optimize, how they plan to optimize contingent workforce management, right? So what we're talking about here, right, is bringing in newer tech. And again, not making a commercial for what Mark and Joseph do at Glider, but I think that, you know, we've reached this point with AI that, and to talk about Chat GPT, right? I did plug in a question the other day, like, how can I get my son to eat his breakfast every morning? And it spit out a snarky answer, right? You know, that's a very interesting tool. I think that I personally want to pump the brakes a little bit on just how much press it's getting. I was actually in line at CVS the other day picking up a prescription, and I didn't realize, I think it was on the cover of Time magazine. It was literally Chat GPT. They asked, you know, I forget the question, but it was literally a screenshot of Chat GPT on the cover of Time magazine, which blew my mind. And again, the nerd in me was, this is pretty cool, right, to see this so mainstream. But we have entered this new era of artificial intelligence and machine learning and data, total talent intelligence, skills intelligence that, you know, I think businesses have this on the brain right now, right? We're talking so much today about strategy around skills-based hiring. We're talking more about, you know, becoming a skills-based organization. I think it's really important to know that businesses are also sort of thinking about how they get there, right? And again, you may see my eyes wander. I do have a very ugly Excel sheet with all my new stats, but you know, what are business leaders planning to do to improve how they find talent, right? deploy, use advanced tech such as AI, machine learning, and blockchain. 70% of organizations plan to do that this year. 74% of businesses plan to utilize artificial intelligence to improve the customer experience, the candidate experience, right? That's huge, right? We're talking about an era where, and again, it's funny, Mark and Joseph and I were just chatting about this yesterday. The phrase digital transformation, I think, is worn out. The tread is gone in those tires, right? I think we've beaten that horse to death, and we shouldn't be talking about digital transformation as this encompassing end-to-end way of just automating everything across the organization. I think that, everything that I've done over the years has been against sort of being siloed in how we think about the business. But I do think that there are specific ways that newer technology can help specific parts of the organization, right? So I think that it's very interesting to note that when businesses are thinking about AI, when you look specifically at AR, HR, TA, and procurement, who are the bulk of the survey respondents in our research study, that AI is on the brain, right? They're really, really, really thinking about how to integrate more AI-led technology in what they're doing. And so when we look at things from candidate experience, the hiring manager experience, just even improving the contingent workforce program, right? Think about a way where you can get more prescriptive guidance on what your contingent workforce may look like in 6 months or 12 months, or even what Mark and I have been talking about pretty much all day today, right? How can you be more proactive and build scenarios where you understand what skills gaps you may have 12 to 18 months from now? It's really going to have a huge impact on what you're doing today. And especially too, again, machine learning is all about eating data and pumping out newer, deeper data based on the data that it's getting fed. We are at a point now where there's so much disruption, so much stuff happening internally and externally, where I think that the insights gleaned from AI-led systems or machine learning-led systems are going to be even more trustworthy than they were before, right? Think pre-pandemic, think if we had AI tools back in 2008, 2009, definitely dating myself here, it makes me feel old, but if we had the ability not to foresee a recession, right? That recession was, wasn't necessarily a surprise, but it wasn't called for a year in advance. But if we knew what exactly was going to happen to our organization based on financial and economic data, we may not have been in the position we were years ago to lay off 20, 30% of our staff in 2008, 2009, right? And so I think about that now, the fact that we've got these wonderful tools to help us really get to the next level of how we want to optimize how work is done. And so, again, Mark, I probably stepped in your toes a little bit because this is some of the stuff that you would normally talk about, right, with the tech, but the data is the data, right? And I think that it's showing that businesses are heavily focused on bringing in advanced tech like AI to achieve these skills-based hiring goals or become more of a skills-based organization.
Yeah, no, yeah, you nailed it. But I think the other thing that's critical to kind of identify is the importance of marrying your systems together and them being complementary, right? And a good example is, and I know this is pie in the sky, and Doug Levy and I have talked about this, before, but imagine a world where where instead of creating a rec from a job title, job description within a VMS, you're creating a rec that has a job title, and then you're selecting someone, going back to my early point, like Chris Dwyer. Yeah. So now you're just saying, I need a full stack developer that looks just like Chris Dwyer. So now that rec is going out to suppliers. Forget the job description, because like we were talking about, those get augmented. They're never specific. But if you know that you have the technical proficiency and DNA of a candidate that's just done an amazing job, yes, you need to be able to articulate to the candidate, hey, I'm recruiting you for a full stack developer for ABC Corp. But now if you're able to assess that candidate and kind of overlay their skills with the skills of the ideal candidate, if you're onto something, right? So I think utilizing these systems complementary, in concert, provides so much value, so much data we didn't have 4 years ago, 5 years ago. The other thing that, and look, I know that we're talking about change management and how hard it is to move things in this industry. The other thing that I am convinced is going to happen, whether it's this year, next year, but I'm really excited about is migrating the traditional rate card methodology away from years of experience and have a more aligned rate card to skill proficiency. You know, it is odd that this industry is one of the only industries in the world that kind of pays for years of experience, right? You don't see it in professional athletics. Like, you don't say, oh, let's sign this guy. He's been a wide receiver for 9 years. And it's like, yeah, but he has like 2 catches in 9 years. Why would we pay him like a 9-year veteran? We'd rather pay someone that has 2 years of league experience with this yards after catch, this many receptions, this few drop balls. Like, why don't we have a rate card that says, this is what you're buying, and we've already determined what we're willing to pay for a junior level person, and we've defined junior level not by you have 3 years of experience, but by these proficiency benchmarks. And if you can't meet these, you're junior. If you exceed them by X amount, you're a mid-level, and if you exceed them by this amount, you're a senior level. And guess what? We don't care. We'll pay for a senior level developer, even if you only have 2 years of experience. It actually is more impressive that after 2 years of doing this, you're testing this far off the charts. You're the type of person, one, we want to invest in, and two, we want in our organization. And I am really sold that eventually we will get there. I don't think it's in the near term, because again, historical rate card methodologies have always been predicated on years of experience. But I think the data is now there to show a shift in the industry away from that, and move more towards what are you getting? And look, this opens up a can of worms, and I won't get into it now, but when we talk about the extended workforce, talk about validating. If you're an organization that's tying an SOW to T&M, well, that's okay. I mean, in some instances, I think T&M SOWs are overused in our space, but if you're going to write an SOW that's T&M, hey, validate that if your provider is saying we're going to give you 3 senior level people, okay, well, your rate card's through the roof, but if I can validate their senior level based on skills proficiency and not because you're saying this is a 19-year veteran doing this type of work, I don't care about their years of experience. I care about the fact that I'm paying an exorbitant rate for this person, and I want to make sure that the skills they're bringing into my organization warrant that rate. So again, I know that's a little far out, but again, when we talk about bringing these systems in place, it would be great to have partners that say, yes, we're going to build a rate card based on proficiency, that, it's going to be loaded into the VMS. It stops hiring managers from overspending, right? I need a junior level person. Well, you can now calibrate a junior level person, and you don't need to hire someone that's 30% more expensive at a senior level, because you know exactly what they're coming in from a skills proficiency perspective.
So Chris and Mark, thank you both. We've only got about 3 minutes left. I think there were a lot of amazing insights that we shared today. And again, everyone, we will be providing some of the data points that Chris shared with us today, post this webinar, as well as the recording. But any final words from you, Chris or Mark, to the audience before we close?
Do you mind if I share my screen really quick, Joseph? I'm not sure if I can do that.
Absolutely, please do.
Okay. So if you can see my screen, this is an infographic that I put up on the Future of Work Exchange the other day. And these are the core tenets of the skill-based organization. I know we only have another couple of minutes, but I think it's a good representation of some of the stuff we talked about here today. And you see number 2, a shift to skills-based hiring, right? Prioritizing expertise, deeper range of total talent, deepening the talent pool, foundation of AI and data, right? Expansion of skills, talking about soft skills, something that Mark talked about a little bit earlier, right? Enhancing the experience for candidates and the hiring manager as well. There's a lot of good stuff here, right? And so I think that, we've really honed in on this idea of skills-based hiring today. But I think when businesses that really want to achieve this goal of becoming a skills-based organization, I think this idea of skills-based hiring and everything we're talking about today is probably the perfect foundation, right? And I think it really goes hand in hand with the idea of candidate centricity, right? Being more talent oriented in our approaches towards hiring, rather than job led or cost led or so on and so forth. But I wanted to call that out, right? Because I think that a good follow-on discussion here is, we talk about skills-based hiring. How does it fit into the skills-based organization, right? And you see that these things are really, really intertwined.
Awesome.
Thank you. All right, Mark, anything from you or?
No, I mean, I'll just leave kind of the panel and the webinar with the thought that I am convinced that eventually all organizations will become skill-based hiring organizations. Again, it may not be this year, may not be this month, maybe next year, maybe a year and a half down the road, but I kind of equate it to, when we were younger and the Jetsons had those video talks and we were like, that's so outlandish. We're never going to have video phones. And clearly we do, right? So I just think it's data that was never available to organizations, to MSPs, to buyers of human capital, whether it's full-time or contingent. And it's just data that needs to be adopted, right? It's a methodology of capturing that data that needs to be accepted and adopted. But I will tell you that, in my opinion, within the next 5 years, every organization is going to be a skills-based hiring organization. There's just too much data, there's just too many good systems, too much data out there not to be a skills-based hiring organization. So, we're constantly looking for the early adopters, the thought leaders. We understand it's scary and you have a big responsibility to your organizations. Partners, we're looking for those folks that kind of share the same vision, but I will leave it in that it's not an if, it's just a when.
Right. I'll echo that. Mark's on point there.
Well, thank you, Chris and Mark, for the energetic and very informative conversation today.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks
Great
a lot.
being here.
Yeah, good seeing you, Chris.
Same here.